Dear. Let's talk to Cindy Yu, Assistant Editor of The Spectator, presenter of Our Chinese Whispered podcast. Cindy, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. A single Chinese spy using LinkedIn. It doesn't sound terribly technical, but tell us the story. What's been going on?
No, it doesn't sound super technical, but this is an exclusive story from the Times. But it does sound like MI5 have known about this for some time as well, of this one man using multiple aliases, using fake photos, basically catfishing. But the targets that he's catfishing are people sensitive, related to sensitive industries in the UK and elsewhere in the West. So people working in the military, civil servants, anyone who might hold sensitive political information. This person has targeted on an industrial scale, the Times says, over the last 5 years. And most likely this person is operating from Beijing, so they're not physically in the UK, but they're basically using LinkedIn to message lots of different people and see what they can get back.
Right. I mean, I would have thought that this would be the kind of thing that's been going on for a very long time, with probably multiple accounts, you know, maybe from one guy. I mean, he's known apparently as Robin Zhang, with his most prolific, the name that they most associate with him. But you would imagine that what we would call bad actors from China or Russia or wherever would be operating on social media. We often hear that the awful lot of the bots are run by Russia. An awful lot of the cyber kind of terrorism that goes on is coming from these kinds of states. You know, I'm amazed that it's only one guy they're talking about, really.
I know, I'm also amazed, actually. I'm hoping that he's got some people to help him as well, because, you know, this sounds like difficult, grueling work for him, one guy, to be getting on with, because he's messaged thousands of people over the years. I think you're right, Mike. You know, this is what spies do. In the days before social media, they'd be cultivating contacts, preferably physically, because, you know, you didn't have that kind of digital communication. But now that you've got LinkedIn, you've got social media, you know, LinkedIn has 930 million people on it. Of course you would use that as a way to cultivate contacts. Now, I think for the people being targeted, you know, those people who have security clearance, you would think that in getting that security clearance, they are being advised by our security services. You know, if you get a cold approach from someone purporting to be from a hostile state, you know, just be careful. What are they up for? You know,
well, I mean, it's not surprising, is it? I mean, surely people are not that daft if they're in government, and particularly if they're in sensitive type jobs. I mean, it's a bit like saying to people, you know, if you get a Facebook Messenger message from somebody you don't know claiming to be Cindy from Texas who really wants to get to know you, it's probably not a good idea to answer it.
Well, that's exactly it. It's phishing, isn't it? And so I think people with you know, normal common sense would know that. And then also people working on sensitive topics would know if anyone's poking around and saying, what are you working on? Let me pay you some money to understand your latest project. Why don't you come to China on an all expenses paid trip? You know, alarm bells should be ringing. And it does sound like that's how, you know, Robin came to light, because it sounds like the Times has spoken to some people who were targeted by this person. So overall, the method is pretty crude, I would say. And I wouldn't say it's something that's too surprising or too much to be worried about, as long as you are sensible about it. Of course, though, there are instances where if you're, let's say, an academic, you don't really necessarily have security clearance, but what you do have is cutting-edge technology or cutting-edge scientific research. Those people might not be so well vetted, and that's something I think the UK needs to think about. You know, business people and academics who might be ensnared by something like this.
Right, and I guess the main worry is whether technologically somebody like this could somehow burrow their way into a technological system. You know, for example, if they befriended some Oxford professor, could they then use that access to find out how to get through the Oxford, you know, mainframe or something like that, and they can actually gain access to things that nobody knew they had. Tom Tugendhat, Security Minister, is warning about LinkedIn being used for this purpose. They've already banned TikTok for government ministers, and they've already supposedly banned it on, I think, the parliamentary estate. I mean, will they ban LinkedIn as well, perhaps?
I mean, look, I think that would just be ridiculous. We can't just ban all forms of digital communication or all forms of our lives just because the Chinese might infiltrate it. I think it's better for people who think that they're in sensitive positions to be mindful of that, to be careful about it. We can't, you know, diminish the way we live our lives just for out of fear of this. And then on the hacking point, Mike, you know, China does have a very well-resourced and extensive cyber network, and we know that. It's got, you know, MI5 has warned us about that. So I wouldn't say that this is particularly an example of that. If they want to hack into Oxford, I think they're going to be trying to do that already.
They probably can. And also, do they also have, because we were all surprised a bit more, I think, last week when the Russian 3 Bulgarian spies were caught, because that seemed to be so kind of old-fashioned and mundane. But you never know. I mean, maybe there's all sorts of approaches being used, and maybe there's somebody in Great Yarmouth occupying a bed and breakfast who's working for the Chinese government.
Yes, I mean, this is the story about the secret police stations too, isn't it? Across the world, you know, what are they actually doing? Are they something to be concerned about, or are they, as they purport to be, just consulate services in a slightly kind of roundabout way? You know, we are starting to, I think, to find out a bit more about it, but that doesn't mean. I mean, frankly, I don't have the clearance to know what MI5 does or doesn't know, but of course they have some people on their minds.
Thank you very much indeed. Cindy Yu, assistant editor of The Spectator and presenter of our Chinese Whispers podcast. Great story on the front page of the Times today. But it is, I would have thought, not particularly surprising that the Chinese Ministry of State Security, whose headquarters are in Beijing, is all over us, right? Like a rash, you might say. Sometimes using LinkedIn, sometimes using TikTok, sometimes using a variety of surveillance techniques, as we heard there from Cindy. They've got these kind of secret police stations which are run entirely by Chinese nationals. We know about what happened up in Manchester when a national who was not Chinese was a dissident taken in and sort of more or less beaten by the people behind the wall, and nobody did much about it. And a few diplomats were expelled, but that was the end of that.